For 50 years, my sister believed her happiness was built on my silence. She was wrong. It was built on a lie. And today, that lie is coming down. She sent me a card for her golden anniversary, with a message that was supposed to be kind, a final twist of the knife. We wouldn't be here without you. She has no idea how right she is. They won't be there, not after today. I'm about to burn their perfect world to the ground with the one thing they can't escape: the truth. If you've ever felt like your voice was stolen, or that you were a secret keeper in someone else's story, then you need to hear this. Follow my story, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and hit that notification bell, because the truth is about to be set free. I am an old woman now. The sea air has etched fine lines around my eyes, a map of sorrows and survival. My hands, the hands that once held a life too small and precious for this world, are spotted with age. They tremble when I pour my morning tea, a faint, rhythmic tremor that seems to beat in time with the relentless pulse of the ocean just beyond my window. I live in this small, quiet house by the sea, a fortress of solitude I built for myself, a world away from the manicured lawns and poisoned pleasantries of the place I once called home. But the past is a stubborn ghost. It has a long reach, and its icy fingers have a way of finding you, no matter how far you run. This morning, it arrived in a cream-colored envelope. The mail carrier, a young man named Tom, with kind eyes and an easy smile, had handed it to me with the rest of the post. "Something special today, Mia," he'd said, gesturing to the thick, expensive paper. He couldn't know. To him, it was just a piece of mail. To me, it was a summons from a life I had tried to bury. The paper was heavy in my trembling hands, the kind of quality that screams of old money and unimpeachable taste. In the top corner, embossed in shimmering gold leaf, was the Preston family crest, a symbol I hadn't seen in decades but could never forget. It was a crest built on reputation, on appearances, on the meticulous sweeping of dirt under a very expensive rug. It was for my sister Clara and her husband Richard's 50th wedding anniversary. 50 years. A golden anniversary for a marriage forged in the darkest corners of a human heart. I didn't need to open it right away. I knew what it would say. I placed it on the small wooden table in my sunroom, the one piece of furniture I'd allowed myself from the old house. The sun streamed in, catching the gold embossing and making it glint, a flash of false light in my quiet sanctuary. For a long while, I just sat there, watching it, the sound of the waves a low, mournful hum in the background. The ocean has been my only constant companion. It doesn't judge. It just rages and retreats, whispers and roars, holding the secrets of the deep in its dark, cold heart. I understood that. I, too, held secrets of the deep. Finally, my fingers, stiff with age and resolve, broke the wax seal. The card opened with a soft, expensive sigh. Inside, in my sister's perfect, looping cursive, the same script that had won her calligraphy awards in school, the same script that had signed my life away, were the words that had been waiting for me for half a century. "Thinking of you, Mia. We wouldn't be here without you." The words were meant to be kind, I suppose. A hollow olive branch extended across a chasm of unspoken truths, a nod to the dutiful sister who had always been there in the background. But I am a student of subtext. I have spent a lifetime deciphering the language of lies, and I knew their true meaning. They were not words of gratitude. They were a brand. A reminder of my silence, the terrible, suffocating silence that had been the price of their happiness. They were a confirmation of my role, the keeper of their perfect marriage, the silent, invisible screw that holds their gilded frame together. I ran a finger over her signature, Clara. The name itself used to sound like a bell, clear and bright. Now, it just tasted like ash in my mouth. For 50 years, I have allowed them this life. I have watched from a distance as they raised their son, as they became pillars of their community, as Richard's career flourished and Clara became the perfect hostess, the perfect wife, the matriarch of a dynasty built on my ruin. I have held my tongue. I have swallowed the screams. I have been the ghost at their feast, the skeleton in their walk-in closet. But something about this card, this 50-year monument to their success, was different. Perhaps it's the proximity of my own end. When you know your time is short, you begin to take stock of the ledger. You begin to wonder what your life has truly meant. Has it been anything more than a sacrifice on the altar of someone else's comfort? The gilded frame of their life, so shiny and perfect from the outside, has always been an illusion. I know, because I have seen the rot underneath. I have felt the splinters. I know the wood is rotten. And today, sitting here with the salt on my lips and this golden lie in my hands, I have decided to pull that screw loose. I will not go to my grave as a footnote in their story. Today, I will let the whole thing fall to dust. The story they buried 50 years ago, the story of what really happened in Harmony Creek, is ready to be unearthed. And I will be the one to tell it. I grew up in a town that was a lie from its very name. Harmony Creek, they called it, nestled in the heart of the Midwest. The name wasn't a description. It was a promise and a command. We were a town of meticulously neat lawns, of white picket fences that served as both decoration and boundary, of Sunday services where the sermons were about forgiveness and the gossip in the pews was about anything but. It was a town of buried secrets, where what you were was less important than what you appeared to be. My family, the Prestons, were Harmony Creek royalty. My father, John Preston, was the third-generation owner of the town's only bank. He was a man who measured worth in assets and reputation, and he ran our family like a balance sheet. Every action was a potential debit or credit against the family name. My mother, Eleanor, was his perfect counterpart. She was a woman whose own ambitions had been sublimated into the social sphere. Her battlefield was the garden club. Her weapons were perfectly arranged floral centerpieces and subtle, cutting remarks about other women's children. They were a formidable team, the architects of our family's impeccable facade. And at the very center of our little kingdom, the crown jewel in the Preston family display, was my older sister, Clara. To say Clara was beautiful is an understatement. It's like saying the sun is warm. She was radiant, effervescent, a force of nature. When she walked into a room, the air itself seemed to shift, reorienting around her. She had our mother's classic features, but with an added sparkle, a vivacity that was all her own. Her laughter was infectious, drawing people to her like moths to a brilliant, dazzling flame. And I was her shadow, the quiet, observant moon, forever destined to orbit her sun. Where Clara was vibrant, a riot of color and sound, I was pale and muted. Where she was effortlessly charming, collecting friends and admirers with a careless wave of her hand, I was awkward and shy, more comfortable with a book than a conversation. We were born only 2 years apart, but we might as well have been from different galaxies. Our parents, in their own transactional way, adored Clara. She was their greatest asset, a walking, talking testament to the Preston family's success. She was the one who would marry well, who would secure their legacy. I learned my place early on. It wasn't spoken aloud, not in a house where so much was left unsaid, but it was understood. My purpose was to reflect Clara's light, not to shine on my own. My role was to support her, to applaud her, to be the stable, unremarkable ground upon which she could build her perfect, glittering life. I remember one summer afternoon. I must have been about 10. I'd spent weeks working on a detailed drawing of the birds that nested in the old oak tree in our backyard. I'd used all my allowance to buy a special set of colored pencils, and I had painstakingly shaded every feather, every leaf. I was proud of it, truly proud. I ran inside, my hands smudged with graphite and wax, to show my mother. She was in the parlor, helping Clara try on a new dress for the annual town picnic. The dress was a confection of yellow organza, and Clara was spinning in front of the long mirror, a vision of youthful perfection. "Mother, look," I'd said, holding up my drawing. She glanced at it, a flicker of distracted impatience in her eyes. "That's nice, dear," she said, her attention already returning to Clara. "Mia, don't you think the sash would look better tied in the back? It accentuates your sister's waist." Clara, catching my eye in the mirror, gave me a small, pitying smile. "It's a nice drawing, Mia," she said, her voice laced with the condescending sweetness she reserved just for me. "Maybe you could draw me in my new dress." My drawing of the birds felt foolish and small in my hands. I quietly folded it, the colors I had been so proud of now seeming dull and lifeless. I slipped out of the room, my masterpiece tucked into my pocket, and went back outside. I learned that day that my accomplishments were interruptions. My passions were trivialities. My role was to be the audience, the stagehand for the grand production of Clara's life. It was a role I played for years. I helped her with her homework, my meticulous notes ensuring her A grades. I covered for her when she snuck out to meet boys my father wouldn't approve of, weathering his cold disappointment when he found me reading in the living room, waiting for the sound of her key in the lock. I was the one she came to in tears when a romance soured, the one who would listen for hours, offering comfort and tea, only to be forgotten the moment a new, more exciting prospect appeared on the horizon. I was the stable, reliable, invisible foundation of her world, and she, and my parents, took it all for granted. It was simply the way things were. I was Mia, the quiet one, the helpful one, the shadow. It was a comfortable arrangement for them. For me, it was a slow, quiet suffocation. I didn't know how to want things for myself, because I had been taught that my wants were secondary. My life was a service to hers, and in Harmony Creek, that was seen as a virtue. It was my duty. It was my place. Richard Vance came to Harmony Creek like a character stepping out of a novel, the kind my sister Clara devoured. He arrived not with a whisper but with a proclamation. He was a young, ambitious lawyer from the city, armed with a degree from a prestigious East Coast university and a smile that could disarm a hostile judge. He was handsome in a sharp, tailored way that seemed exotic compared to the soft, corn-fed boys of our town. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, seemed to look right through you, assessing your value, your use, your place in his world. He was everything Harmony Creek admired and secretly coveted, successful, supremely confident, and from what everyone whispered was a good family, which was town code for old money. He'd joined the town's most respected law firm as a junior partner, a move that signaled he was here to stay, to put down roots, to conquer our small pond. And of course, he set his sights on Clara. No one was surprised. It was as if it had been preordained. They were the perfect couple, a king and queen for our little town. Richard, with his city polish and sharp ambition. Clara, with her local royalty status and radiant beauty. Their courtship was a public spectacle. He would send flowers to our house, extravagant bouquets that made my mother gasp with delight. He would pick Clara up for dates in his gleaming black automobile, a machine that looked like it belonged on a city boulevard, not the quiet streets of Harmony Creek. He'd charm my father with talk of investments and politics, and he'd flatter my mother until she was positively glowing. Everyone was enchanted. The whole town seemed to hold its breath, watching the fairy tale unfold. At church, at the grocery store, at the garden club meetings, the only topic of conversation was Richard and Clara. Weren't they a stunning pair? Wasn't he just the perfect gentleman? Didn't she look happier than she'd ever been? Everyone was enchanted. Everyone but me. From the very beginning, a cold knot of dread would tighten in my stomach whenever Richard was near. When he smiled at me, a polite, brotherly acknowledgement, his eyes were as cold and flat as winter ice. There was no warmth there, only calculation. When he would place a hand on my arm in a seemingly casual, familial gesture, my skin would crawl. It felt less like a touch and more like a claim, a branding. He was marking his territory, and our family was now part of it. I saw things no one else seemed to notice, or perhaps no one else wanted to. I saw the flash of irritation that would cross his face when a waiter was too slow, a look so fleeting it was gone before anyone else registered it. I saw the way he would subtly steer conversations back to himself, his accomplishments, his opinions, while making it seem like he was genuinely interested in others. I saw the possessive way his hand would rest on the small of Clara's back, a gesture that looked like affection to the world, but to me, it looked like ownership. One evening, I tried to voice my concerns. Clara was in her bedroom, preening in front of her mirror before a date with Richard. She was humming, a happy, carefree sound. I was sitting on her bed, watching her pin up her hair. "Clara," I began, my voice softer than I intended. Does he ever seem a little intense to you?" She paused, her hands still in her hair, and looked at my reflection in the mirror. She laughed, a light, dismissive sound. "Intense? What are you talking about, Mia? He's passionate. He's driven. That's why he's so successful." "I don't know," I pushed, feeling my throat tighten. "It's just the way he looks at people sometimes. It feels cold. And when he smiled at Mrs. Gable at church on Sunday, it didn't reach his eyes." Clara turned around fully now, an expression of exasperated pity on her face. It was a look I knew well. "Oh, Mia, don't be so dramatic. You're just not used to men like Richard. You're used to the clumsy farm boys around here. Richard is a man of the world." She came over and sat next to me, patting my hand in that same condescending way she had since we were children. "I know it's hard to see me so happy. I know you've always been a little jealous. It's okay. But don't try to find flaws in him just because you're lonely." The accusation stung, sharp and deep. Jealous. It was the easiest, cruelest dismissal. It invalidated everything I felt, painting my genuine fear as petty envy. I had no response. What could I say? That it felt like a predator was being welcomed into our home. They would think I was losing my mind. I tried one more time, with my parents. We were at the dinner table a few nights later. Richard had just been invited for the first time, and my father was still pontificating about the young man's brilliant future. "He's got a good head on his shoulders, that Vance boy," my father declared, tapping his fork on the table for emphasis. "He'll be running that firm in 10 years, you mark my words." "And he just adores our Clara," my mother added, her voice full of satisfaction. "It's a perfect match." I took a deep breath. "I don't trust him," I said, the words falling into the comfortable silence like stones. My father's face hardened. "What did you say?" "I said I don't trust him," I repeated, my voice trembling slightly. "There's something about him." "He's not what he seems." My mother let out a small, horrified gasp. "Mia, what a terrible thing to say. After we've had such a lovely evening, Richard is a perfect gentleman." "Your mother is right," my father said, his voice low and dangerous. "You are being difficult. Richard Vance is the best thing that has ever happened to this family. He comes from good stock, he's successful, and he wants to marry your sister. This will solidify our standing in this community for a generation. Do not, and I mean do not, do anything to jeopardize that because of some foolish, womanly intuition." He spat the words womanly intuition as if they were a disease. "You're just upset that Clara is getting all the attention as usual," he continued, his eyes like steel. "You are lucky that a man of Richard's caliber will soon be your brother-in-law. You would do well to be grateful and keep your opinions to yourself." And that was it. The door was slammed shut. My voice was silenced. My concerns were dismissed as jealousy, as foolishness, as a threat to the family's ambitions. They were all so blind, so utterly desperate for the fairy tale to be real that they refused to see the truth right in front of them. They welcomed him with open arms, celebrating the union, laying out the red carpet for him. I was the only one who saw the serpent, glistening and charming, long before he entered our perfect garden. And I was completely, terrifyingly alone. I watched him slide his ring onto my sister's finger, watched the town applaud, watched my parents weep with joy, and all I could feel was the cold certainty that he had come not to join our family, but to devour it. The air in Richard and Clara's house was different from the salty breeze I'd grown up with. It was heavy, scented with Clara's expensive perfumes and the lemon polish the housekeeper used on the grand mahogany staircase. It was the smell of money, of order, of a life meticulously arranged. After the wedding, a whirlwind of champagne and white lace, it was simply assumed I would move in. To help Clara get settled, my mother had said, her voice bright with the pride of having married her eldest daughter so well. "It's the least you can do." And so, I became a fixture in their perfect home, another well-placed piece of furniture. The serpent didn't arrive with a hiss and a rattle. It slithered in on a whisper. At first, Richard's words were coded in the guise of brotherly affection. We'd be sitting at the polished dining table, the silver gleaming under the chandelier, and he'd catch my eye as I reached for a bread roll. "Careful, Mia," he'd say with a gentle, chiding smile. You have to watch that figure. Not all of us are blessed with Clara's metabolism. Clara would laugh, a light, tinkling sound. Oh, Richard, don't tease her. Mia's fine. But she wouldn't look at me. Her eyes would be on her husband, full of adoration. The comment would hang in the air, and the bread would taste like ash in my mouth. It became a pattern, a slow, methodical erosion. He started with my appearance. The simple dresses my mother had helped me pack were suddenly drab and unflattering. He'd hold up one of Clara's silk blouses against my chest and sigh dramatically. See, Clara? A little color would do wonders for her. She just needs some guidance. He bought me a dress once, a deep burgundy sheath that was far too tight and cut too low. He insisted I wear it to a small dinner party they were hosting. I spent the entire evening feeling exposed, pulling at the hem, my skin crawling under the gaze of their friends. When I tried to refuse, he'd put on a wounded expression. I'm only trying to help, Mia. I want you to feel confident, to shine a little. Is that so wrong? Clara would back him up. He's right, Mia. You hide yourself away. He just wants what's best for you. My opinions were the next to go. If I mentioned a book I was reading, Richard would dismiss it as sentimental nonsense. If I dared to venture a thought on politics during dinner, he would listen with theatrical patience before turning to another guest and saying, Mia has such simple views on the world. It's rather charming, isn't it? The laughter that followed was never cruel, always light, which made it so much worse. It made me feel foolish, paranoid. I was the one who couldn't take a joke. I was the sensitive one. Soon, I learned to keep my thoughts to myself, to let my words dissolve before they reached my lips. I would sit at their table, a silent observer, nodding and smiling when appropriate. He began to manage my life with the same quiet efficiency he managed his legal practice. My friends from town would call, and Richard would often answer the phone. Mia's resting, he'd tell them in a concerned voice. She's been a little overwhelmed lately, or, she's helping Clara with a project right now. Can I have her call you back? He never passed on the messages. Letters from a dear friend who had moved away stopped arriving. I found out months later by chance that she'd written several times. I never saw them. When I confronted him, my voice trembling, he feigned surprise. Oh my goodness, I must have misplaced them. I'm so terribly sorry, Mia. With everything going on, my mind is a sieve. He looked so genuinely apologetic that I almost believed him. But a cold knot of certainty was tightening in my stomach. He was building a cage around me, bar by invisible bar. The walls of that beautiful house, with its sun-drenched rooms and manicured gardens, began to feel like they were closing in. The house was my world now. I spent my days arranging flowers, polishing silver that was already gleaming, and helping Clara plan menus for parties I dreaded. She saw none of it. Or perhaps she chose not to. One afternoon, I gathered the courage to speak to her. We were in her sitting room, the air thick with the scent of lilies. Clara, I began, my hands twisting in my lap. Does he ever seem a little hard on me to you? She looked up from her magazine, a frown creasing her perfect brow. Hard on you? What do you mean? The things he says. About my clothes. About what I think. In front of your friends. It makes me feel... I couldn't find the word. Small. Invisible. Ashamed. Clara set her magazine down with a sigh of exasperation. Mia, for heaven's sake. Richard adores you. He sees you as the sister he never had. He's just trying to toughen you up a little. You've always been too soft. The world isn't Harmony Creek, you know. He's trying to prepare you for it. But it hurts, I whispered. Don't be so dramatic, she snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. He's a successful, brilliant man. He knows how the world works. You should be grateful he's taking an interest. He's helping you become more like, well, more polished. Less of a wallflower. The comparison hung between us. He was helping me become more like her. And with that, the conversation was over. She had sealed the final lock on the cage. She was not just a spectator. She was his accomplice, the warden's smiling wife. My own sister believed the whispers were for my own good. The prison wasn't just the house. It was the suffocating belief that I was the one who was broken, and Richard, my tormentor, was my savior. The seasons changed, but inside the house, the climate remained the same, a perpetual, controlled chill. The whispers, once subtle, grew more pointed. My isolation became absolute. The whispers, however, were just the prelude. The real horror was still waiting in the wings, cloaked in the silence of a perfectly kept home. It happened on a Tuesday. I remember the trivial detail because the day had been so ordinary. Clara was out of town for 2 nights, visiting a college friend in the city. Her absence left a strange vacuum in the house, a quiet that felt both liberating and ominous. I had spent the day reading in my room, enjoying the simple luxury of not having to perform. I ate a simple dinner in the kitchen, a sandwich and a glass of milk, avoiding the grand dining room that felt like a stage set for a play I no longer wanted to be in. I went to bed early, the house settling into its nightly groans and sighs. I was drifting into sleep when I heard my bedroom door click open. I sat bolt upright, my heart instantly hammering against my ribs. Richard stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the faint light from the hall. He wasn't smiling. His face was a blank mask, his eyes dark and unreadable. "Richard?" I asked, my voice a frail thread of sound. "What is it? Is something wrong?" He didn't answer. He just closed the door behind him, plunging the room into near darkness. The click of the latch was the loudest sound I had ever heard. He moved toward the bed. There was no rage in his movements, no overt aggression. That's what was so terrifying. It was a calm, deliberate assertion of power, like a man walking across a room to claim something he believed was already his. "Get out," I said, scrambling backward until my back hit the headboard. The words had no force. They were just puffs of air. He sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight. I could smell the faint scent of whiskey on his breath. He reached out and touched my arm. I flinched as if burned. "Please," I begged, the word cracking. "Richard, please don't." The worst part was the silence. There was no argument, no shouting match that might have alerted a neighbor, no struggle that might have left evidence of a fight. He was methodical. He was strong, and I was so small. He pinned my wrists with one hand, his grip like iron. I fought, I twisted, I kicked, but it was like struggling against a stone wall. It was useless. And all the while, he said nothing. He just looked at me, his expression unchanged, as if he were observing a mildly interesting experiment. The only sounds were the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears and my muffled sobs, which he smothered with his other hand. It was a violation so profound, so quiet, it felt like my very soul was being erased. When it was over, he stood up, straightened his shirt, and walked out of the room as calmly as he had entered. The door clicked shut behind him, and I was left alone in the wreckage, in the deafening silence. I lay there for hours, rigid, unable to move, unable to cry. The world had tilted on its axis. The floor was the ceiling was the floor. Nothing made sense. The next day passed in a blur. I stayed in my room, locked the door, and told the housekeeper through the wood that I was feeling unwell. I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat, staring at the wall, replaying the silent, horrific film in my head. The bruises were already beginning to bloom on my arms, ugly purple and blue marks where his fingers had dug into my skin. They were the only proof that it had been real. Clara was due back that evening. A part of me, the small, naive part that still existed somewhere deep inside, clung to a desperate hope. She was my sister. Blood was thicker than water, thicker than marriage vows. She would see the bruises. She would see the truth in my eyes. She had to. She arrived home around 7, her voice echoing brightly from the foyer. "Mia, I'm home. I brought you a little something from the city." I took a deep, shuddering breath and unlocked my door. I walked down the grand staircase like a condemned woman walking to the gallows. She was in the living room, taking off her gloves, her face flushed and happy. "There you are," she said, smiling. "Are you feeling better?" Cook said you were sick. Clara, I need to talk to you, I said. My voice was hoarse, unfamiliar. The smile faltered on her lips. She saw my face. My goodness, Mia, you look dreadful. What on earth is wrong? I couldn't say the words. They were too monstrous to form. Instead, I held out my arms, pushing up the sleeves of my cardigan to show her the marks. Look, I whispered. She stared at the bruises. For a long moment, her face was a mask of confusion, her brow furrowed. Then something shifted. It was like a shudder coming down behind her eyes. Disbelief hardened into suspicion, then curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. What is this? She asked, her voice dangerously low. It was him, I choked out. Last night, he came into my room. Clara took a step back, as if I were something contagious. Her face, which I had known my entire life, became the face of a stranger, a cold, hostile stranger. How could you? She hissed, her voice trembling not with sympathy but with rage. How could you lie like this? I'm not lying, Clara, I swear to you. Liar. The word was a venomous dart. You want to destroy me, don't you? You've always been jealous. Jealous of me, jealous of Richard, jealous of what we have. You can't stand to see me happy, so you invent this. This disgusting, wicked story to ruin it all. She didn't scream. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke in that low, controlled tone that cut deeper than any shout. It was the voice of judgment, of condemnation. Clara, please, I sobbed, tears finally breaking free. He hurt me. You're my sister. You have to believe me. She looked from the bruises on my arms to my face, and her expression was one of utter revulsion. My husband would never do something like that. He is a good man. You are the one who is sick. You are the one who is twisted. She took a deep breath, composing herself, her public face snapping back into place. I'm going to pretend this conversation never happened, and you will never, ever speak of this again. Do you understand me? I looked at her, at the sister who had shared my childhood, and I saw nothing of her left. There was only the wife of Richard Vance, the protector of the perfect marriage, the guardian of the gilded cage. My last hope crumbled into dust. She hadn't just failed to protect me. She had actively chosen the lie. She had chosen her pristine life over me. She had looked at my pain and called it a fabrication. In that moment, she became as much my violator as he was. She left me there, alone in the silent, beautiful living room, and went upstairs to greet her husband. The world didn't just end with a bang. Sometimes it ends with the quiet, sickening lurch of morning sickness. 2 months after Clara chose her marriage over my truth, my body began to betray me in a new and horrifying way. It started with a metallic taste in my mouth, a wave of nausea that would hit me at the smell of coffee brewing in the morning. At first, I dismissed it as stress, a physical manifestation of the trauma that was living under my skin. But then I missed my monthly cycle, and then I missed another. A week passed in a fog of pure, animal terror. I would lie awake at night, my hand pressed against my still flat stomach, a cold dread seeping into my bones. It couldn't be. It was impossible, but there had been no one else. The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. I was carrying his child. His. The seed of my violation was growing inside of me. The knowledge was a poison. Every meal I ate felt like I was feeding it. Every breath I took felt like I was giving it life. I would look at myself in the mirror and see a stranger, a vessel for a secret that was too monstrous to bear. For days, I barely spoke, moving through the house like a phantom, the unspoken truth a lead weight in my belly. Clara attributed my pallor and sickness to a lingering flu, treating me with an impatient, dismissive kindness that was almost worse than her anger. Finally, when I could no longer bear the secret alone, when the terror threatened to swallow me whole, I knew I had to tell my parents. I drove to their house, the house I grew up in, my hands shaking so badly on the steering wheel that the familiar road seemed to warp before my eyes. I found them in the sunroom, my father reading the paper, my mother tending to her orchids. I stood in the doorway, unable to cross the threshold. Mother? Dad? They looked up, their faces etched with mild surprise. "Mia, dear, what a nice surprise," my mother said, smiling. I couldn't smile back. I couldn't even form a proper sentence. I just stood there until the silence became heavy and awkward. "I'm pregnant," I blurted out. The words hung in the air, obscene and out of place amongst the cheerful chintz and blooming flowers. My mother's smile froze and fell. My father slowly lowered his newspaper. They stared at me, and in their eyes I did not see sympathy. I did not see concern for my well-being. I saw panic, pure, unadulterated panic. But it wasn't for me. It was for the family name, for the pristine reputation of the Prestons of Harmony Creek, for Clara's perfect, enviable marriage. "What?" my father finally managed to say, his voice strained. "What did you just say?" "I'm pregnant," I repeated, my voice barely a whisper. It happened that night Clara was away. It was Richard." My mother let out a small, horrified gasp and sank into a wicker chair, pressing a hand to her chest. "No," she whispered. "No, that's not possible." My father's face hardened, his expression turning grim. "Are you certain?" he asked, his tone that of a lawyer cross-examining a hostile witness. "Yes," I said, tears welling in my eyes. "There's no one else. There's been no one." The conversation that followed was not about me. It was not about what had been done to me, about the violence and the betrayal. My pain was a footnote, an inconvenient detail in a much larger, more important story, the potential for a scandal. My trauma was a public relations crisis that needed to be managed, contained, and eliminated. "My God," my father muttered, pacing the floor. "Clara, what will this do to Clara? And Richard's career? A thing like this could ruin him. It could ruin all of us." "How could you have let this happen, Mia?" my mother asked, her voice gaining a sharp, accusatory edge. She wasn't asking how I could have let him violate me. She was asking how I could have allowed this consequence, this messy, inconvenient child, to come into existence. In her eyes, I was not the victim of a crime. I was the perpetrator of a scandal. I had done this to them. I stared at them, my parents, the two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, and I felt a chasm open between us. They were looking at a problem to be solved, not a daughter who was broken and terrified. The pregnancy wasn't a tragedy of my body and soul. It was a stain on the family's honor. And they were already gathering the soap and brushes, ready to scrub me clean, no matter how much of my own skin came off in the process. They called a family meeting a few days later. It wasn't a discussion. It was a tribunal. We gathered in the formal living room of my parents' house, a room reserved for holidays and important guests. The air was thick with unspoken accusations. I sat on a stiff, upright chair, feeling small and exposed. Across from me sat Clara and Richard. My parents took their places on the sofa, positioning themselves as judges. It was a grotesque parody of a family gathering. Richard, the architect of my ruin, sat there with an expression of deep, troubled concern. He played the part of the wronged husband, the man betrayed by a troubled, unstable sister-in-law who had made a terrible mistake. He didn't look at me. He just stared at his hands, a picture of remorseful dignity. Clara was a statue carved from ice. Her face was pale and set, her eyes fixed on a point on the far wall, refusing to acknowledge my existence. My father started the proceedings. His voice was low and grave, as if he were delivering a eulogy. "We are here to discuss a very serious situation, a situation that threatens the foundation of this family." He spoke of reputation, of legacy, of the public shame we would all face if this unfortunate circumstance were to become known. He never once used the word assault. He spoke of my condition as if it were a disease I had contracted through some personal failing. I tried to speak, to defend myself. "He attacked me," I said, my voice shaking. "He forced himself on me." Richard flinched theatrically as if I'd struck him. Clara's head whipped around and she glared at me with pure venom. "Stop it," she hissed. "Stop your disgusting lies." It was my mother who delivered the final verdict. She had been silent until now, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she spoke, her voice was the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It wasn't angry or hysterical. It was calm, rational, and utterly monstrous. "Mia," she began, her tone gentle, as if she were explaining a simple household chore. "We have decided on the best course of action, for everyone." I looked at her, a desperate, silent plea in my eyes. "You will carry the baby to term," she said, her voice never wavering. "We will find a discreet doctor in another state. You will go away for the final months, to a clinic. It will be said that you are taking an extended trip to care for a sick relative." She paused, taking a breath before delivering the rest of the sentence. "When the child is born, Clara and Richard will adopt it. They've been trying to have a baby, you know, for over a year, with no success." She smiled, a small, tight, horrifying smile. "In a way, this is a gift, a solution that solves everything. You will be its aunt. You will be part of its life." The room swam before my eyes. They weren't just taking my baby, they were twisting my tragedy into their miracle. "We will send you away for a while after the birth," my mother continued, her voice relentlessly reasonable. "A few months, perhaps, for you to recover, and then you will come back. You'll come back to us. No one outside this room will ever know the truth. The story will be perfect." I turned to Clara, my last desperate appeal, my sister. Her name was a silent scream in my mind. Her eyes finally met mine, and they were as cold and hard as frozen lakes. There was no pity, no sisterly love, nothing, just a chilling resolve. "It's the only way, Mia," she said, her voice flat. "Think about the baby. It deserves a good life, a proper family, with a mother and a father. Don't be selfish." Selfish. The word struck me with the force of a physical blow. They were stealing my child, my body, my story, and they were calling me selfish for wanting to keep them. They weren't just covering up a crime. They were erasing me. They were burying me alive under the foundations of their perfect family and handing my sister the shovel. The following months were a waking nightmare, a life lived in parentheses. I was a secret, a walking, breathing liability. My growing belly was hidden under loose-fitting clothes. My morning sickness explained away as a nervous stomach. I was sent away, as planned, to a sterile, anonymous clinic in a state I'd never been to, where the nurses treated me with a professional detachment that was its own form of cruelty. I gave birth in a quiet, white room to a son. He was perfect. He had a full head of dark hair and a tiny, frowning mouth. When the nurse placed him in my arms, he opened his eyes. They were my eyes. In that moment, the entire universe contracted to the small, warm weight of him against my chest. He was real. He was mine. I named him Daniel, a name I whispered just to myself, a secret I would keep locked in my heart. They let me hold him for 10 minutes. 10 minutes to memorize the shape of his face, the feel of his skin, the scent of his new life. Then, the nurse came back. "It's time," she said, her voice gentle but firm. She took him from my arms. I watched her walk out of my room and down the hall, to another room where Clara was waiting. My sister, who had never felt a contraction, who had never labored, was about to become a mother. My son was about to become her son. I was sent to a rest home for 6 months, a quiet, leafy place that felt more like a genteel prison. I was meant to recover, but what I was really doing was learning my new role, practicing the lines for the part I would play for the rest of my life. When I was deemed sufficiently recovered, I returned to Harmony Creek. I returned to their house. I was Aunt Mia. My life became a performance. I lived in their house, a ghost at their table, a shadow in their sunlit rooms. I watched my son, my Daniel, take his first steps toward Clara, his arms outstretched as he gurgled, "Mama." The sound was a physical pain, a blade twisting in my gut every single time. I watched Richard, my rapist, lift Daniel onto his shoulders, parading him around the living room as my parents clapped and beamed, praising him as the most doting, perfect father. The abuse changed its form. It was no longer overt. Richard's cruelty became a finely honed psychological instrument. He would brush past me in the hallway, his shoulder deliberately bumping mine, and whisper, so low that only I could hear, "Our son is looking well today, don't you think?" He would praise me in front of guests for being such a devoted aunt, his eyes glinting with a secret shared knowledge that made my skin crawl. He was reminding me, always, that he was in control, that he had won. Clara, in her role as the mother, wielded her power with chilling precision. She controlled my access to Daniel. If I committed some small, imagined infraction, if my sadness showed too much in my eyes, if I was too quiet at dinner, my punishment would be swift. "I think Daniel needs a little less excitement today," she'd say, her voice sweet as honey. "Perhaps you shouldn't take him to the park, Mia. He needs to stay close to his mother." She would withhold him from me, dangling my connection to my own son like a prize I had to continuously earn. Every day was a fresh hell, a birthday party where I had to smile and help serve cake, while Daniel blew out candles on a cake that said, "Happy birthday to our wonderful son." A scraped knee where he ran crying, not to me, but to Clara. A bedtime story read, not by my voice, but by the voice of the man who had shattered my world. I was living in the ruins of my own life, forced to watch as they built their happiness on top of them, and I was expected to applaud. I was Aunt Mia, the ghost in the nursery, haunting the life that should have been mine. The years folded into one another, creased and worn like the pages of a book read too many times. I was no longer Mia Preston. I was Aunt Mia. The two words became my entire identity, a title that defined my place in the universe. Aunt Mia, the quiet one who lived upstairs. Aunt Mia, who never married, who always seemed to be gazing at something far away. Aunt Mia, the permanent silent fixture in the grand home of Richard and Clara Vance, a piece of furniture that breathed. The fire that had once raged inside me, the desperate clawing thing that had screamed for justice in the dark, had long since died. In its place was a fine cold ash that settled in my lungs and coated my heart. I learned the art of invisibility, a skill born of necessity. I could move through a crowded room and leave no wake. I could sit at a dinner table, and my silence would be as natural as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. My life was a rhythm of quiet duties. I tended the gardens, I polished the silver, I mended Daniel's clothes when he was small. I was a ghost in the machine of their perfect family, a necessary but unseen cog. And Daniel, he was the sun my gray world orbited. I watched him grow, every milestone a fresh tear in the fabric of my soul. His first steps, his first words, the first time he called Clara Mama. The first time he ran to Richard, laughing, and called him Dad. Each moment was a masterpiece of cruelty, and I absorbed it all, the pain becoming a dull, familiar ache, like a bone that had set wrong. Then, the years spun faster. Daniel was a teenager, tall and handsome, with my eyes but Richard's confident posture. He was a good boy, kind and bright, a small miracle of grace grown from the poisoned soil of his conception. And one summer, he brought home Sarah. She was his first serious girlfriend, a girl with sunshine in her hair and a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. She was sweet, a little shy, and she looked at Daniel with an open, adoring heart that made something in my chest constrict. They were everything young love should be, innocent and full of impossible, beautiful promise. The family held a barbecue by the pool to celebrate the end of the school year. It was a perfect Harmony Creek evening. The air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and chlorine, the sky a deep, bruised purple. Laughter echoed across the manicured lawn. Clara was in her element, the perfect hostess, gliding between guests with a tray of cocktails. Daniel and his friends were splashing in the pool, their shouts and laughter punctuating the low hum of adult conversation. I was where I always was, on the periphery, sitting in a wicker chair in the shadows of the veranda, nursing a glass of iced tea. From my vantage point, I could see everything. And I saw Richard. He wasn't with his usual circle of business associates and town council members. He had separated from the herd. He was over by the far side of the pool, near the diving board, talking to Sarah. She had just gotten out of the water, a towel wrapped around her small frame, droplets glistening on her shoulders like tiny diamonds. Daniel was still in the pool, engaged in a wrestling match with a friend, his back to them. I watched, and the familiar, dull ache in my chest began to sharpen. Richard was leaning against the white picket fence that enclosed the pool area. He was in his element, tanned and fit, his silver hair catching the last rays of the setting sun. He was smiling his famous smile, the one that had charmed a town, won him elections, and captivated my sister. It was a weapon, and he wielded it with surgical precision. Sarah was smiling back, a little nervously. She was clearly flattered by the attention from her boyfriend's powerful, handsome father. I saw her tuck a wet strand of hair behind her ear, a small, deferential gesture. Richard leaned in a little closer, his voice a low, conspiratorial murmur I couldn't hear, but I didn't need to. I knew its texture, I knew its intent. I watched his eyes, and in that moment, the decades fell away. They were not the warm, crinkled eyes of a man in his 60s making polite conversation with his son's girlfriend. They were cold, utterly, unnervingly cold. They were the eyes of a predator sizing up its prey. The charming smile was a mask, a flimsy facade that couldn't hide the glacial chill behind it. He looked at her with the same appraising, possessive hunger with which he'd once looked at me, the same slight tilt of the head, the same way his gaze lingered a second too long on her mouth, her shoulders, the exact same. The fine, cold ash in my soul, dormant for 30 years, did not smolder. It did not smoke. It detonated. A silent, white-hot explosion of pure, condensed rage erupted behind my eyes. The ice that had encased my heart for a generation shattered into a million razor-sharp shards. I felt the heat of it on my face, a phantom fever. The pattern. He was a creature of patterns, of appetites, and he was about to repeat his oldest one. He was going to consume this sweet, unsuspecting girl, tarnish her, perhaps even break her, for his own casual amusement. Another life offered up on the altar of his ego. I will not let you. The thought was not a whisper. It was a vow forged in the furnace of my newfound fury. I will not let you devour another life. I will not stand by and watch you do to her what you did to me. Before you can lay a single predatory hand on her, I will burn your world to the very ground. I will turn this gilded cage to smoke and ash, and I will scatter it on the wind. My hands were shaking, rattling the ice in my glass. I set it down on the small table beside me with a sharp clink. For the first time in years, my vision was perfectly clear. The haze of sorrow and resignation had burned away. I saw Clara, laughing at something the mayor said, blissfully unaware, a willing co-conspirator in her own opulent prison. I saw Daniel, my son, my beautiful boy, swimming happily towards the man he called father, the monster who was already plotting to poison his happiness. That night, I didn't sleep. I waited until the house was dark and silent, until the rhythmic snores of Richard and Clara drifted down the hallway. Then I slipped out of my room and went not to the garden or the kitchen, but to the one place I had avoided for years, Richard's study. It was his sanctuary, all dark wood and leather and the faint cloying scent of his cologne. This was where the real business of the Vance and Preston families was conducted. For years, I had been the family's silent archivist, the one tasked with organizing old papers, filing documents, labeling photographs. They thought me too meek, too broken to understand what I was handling. They were wrong. I knew where every skeleton was buried, because I had been the one forced to dig the graves and carry the shovels. I didn't turn on the main light, just a small desk lamp that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. I ran my fingers over the spines of the financial ledgers, the boxes of old contracts, the family photo albums. It was all here, the story of their lives built on the foundations of my silence. I began to dig. I couldn't dismantle an empire with fury alone. The Prestons and the Vances didn't just live in Harmony Creek. They owned it. Their roots ran deep, entangled with every aspect of the town's life. The bank, the town council, the local newspaper. To challenge Richard publicly on my own would be suicide. They would paint me as a hysterical, jealous spinster. They had done it before. They would do it again, with practiced ease. I needed a weapon, and I needed an ally. Someone outside their vast, suffocating sphere of influence. Someone they couldn't buy, bully, or bury. A name surfaced from the depths of my memory: Martha Blackwood. Martha was a town legend, a retired defense attorney who lived in a rambling old house on the very edge of town, where the manicured lawns of Harmony Creek gave way to untamed woods. She was brilliant, cantankerous, and utterly fearless. In her prime, she had been a terror in the courtroom, known for shredding witnesses with a quiet, surgical logic. She had retired years ago, but the aura of her formidable reputation lingered. I remembered her from old town functions, a tall, sharp-featured woman with piercing gray eyes who always seemed to be observing the proceedings with a knowing, cynical amusement. She would look at my family, at the perfect tableau of Richard, Clara, and their devoted sister, Mia, and I always felt that she saw right through the performance. She saw the cracks in the porcelain. The drive to her house felt like crossing a border into another country. I left the pristine, orderly streets of my gilded cage and drove down a winding gravel road. Her house was set back from the road, partially obscured by a riot of overgrown rosebushes and towering oak trees. It wasn't neglected, just untamed. Like her. I parked my modest car and walked up the stone path, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it, the point of no return. I was about to hand the entirety of my broken life to a near stranger, trusting only a gut feeling and the memory of a cynical glint in her eye. I raised my hand and knocked on the heavy oak door. It swung open almost immediately, as if she had been expecting me. Martha Blackwood stood there, older now, her hair a shock of wiry silver, but her eyes were just as I remembered, sharp, intelligent, and missing nothing. She wore a simple man's work shirt and jeans, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Mia Preston," she said. It wasn't a question. Her voice was a low, gravelly rasp. "I was wondering when you'd finally show up on my doorstep. It's taken you long enough. Come in." She led me not into a formal living room, but into a massive, cluttered study. Books overflowed from shelves, stacked on the floor, teetering on every available surface. The air smelled of old paper, wood smoke, and strong coffee. She gestured to a worn leather armchair across from a large, scarred wooden desk. "Sit," she commanded, moving to a small kitchenette in the corner. "Whiskey or coffee?" "Coffee, please," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She brought over 2 steaming mugs and sat down behind the desk, watching me over the rim of her own. She didn't press. She just waited, her gaze steady and unnervingly perceptive. The silence stretched, filled only by the ticking of a clock and the frantic pounding of my own heart. Finally, I found my voice. You said you were wondering when I'd show up." "I did," she nodded. "I'm a lawyer, Mia. Or I was. I deal in facts, but I trade in stories. And your family's story never added up. The perfect couple, the perfect son, and the sad, silent sister who gave up her entire life to be their shadow. It's a fairy tale, and fairy tales are full of lies." She took a sip of her coffee. "I always knew Richard Vance was a snake. I just never knew what kind of venom he used, and I always wondered what they had on you to keep you so quiet for so long." The directness of her words, the lack of pity, the sheer, unvarnished acknowledgement of the lie I had been living, broke the dam. The story I had held inside me for a lifetime, the poison I had swallowed every single day, began to pour out. I started at the beginning. Harmony Creek, Clara the sun, me the shadow, Richard's arrival, the warnings I tried to give, dismissed as jealousy, the wedding, moving in with them, the slow, insidious campaign of psychological warfare Richard waged against me. The casual cruelties, the gaslighting, the isolation, Clara's complicity, her willful blindness. I told her about the night the psychological turned physical. I spoke the words I hadn't dared to whisper, even to myself, for over 30 years. I told her about the attack, my voice a dead, flat monotone as I recounted the horror of it. I told her about going to Clara, showing her the bruises on my arms, my desperate, pleading hope that my sister would finally see the monster she had married. And I told her about the ultimate betrayal, Clara's disbelief, her accusation that I was a liar, a homewrecker, her choice to protect her perfect marriage over her own sister. My voice cracked when I told her about the pregnancy, the discovery that I was carrying my attacker's child, the cold panic, the terror. I recounted the family trial, the way my parents had looked at me not with compassion, but with cold, calculating fear for the family's reputation. I was not their suffering daughter. I was a scandal to be managed. I detailed the cruel verdict they handed down, the secret birth, the 10 minutes I was allowed to hold my son before he was taken from me. The moment I named him Daniel, a name I whispered into his tiny ear like a secret prayer. And then, the living hell that followed, returning to that house, no longer a sister, but a ghost. Watching my child grow up calling my sister mother, and my rapist, father. Enduring Richard's smug, triumphant cruelty year after year. When I finally got to the barbecue, to the sight of Richard turning his predatory gaze on Sarah, the dead monotone in my voice was replaced by the cold, hard fury that had brought me to Martha's door. "He's going to do it again," I finished, my hands clenched into white-knuckled fists in my lap. "He's going to ruin that girl. And I will not let it happen. I will tear him down. I will tear them all down. I don't care what it costs." I was breathing heavily, the room silent except for my ragged breaths. I had laid the entire sordid, ugly truth of my life on her desk. I finally looked up, meeting her gaze, expecting shock or disgust, or perhaps even pity. I saw none of it. Martha Blackwood's expression was unreadable, her gray eyes like chips of granite. She took a long, slow sip of her coffee, her gaze never leaving mine. Then, she placed the mug down on the desk with a soft, definitive click. She simply nodded, a small, sharp movement of her head. "I always knew Richard Vance was a snake," she repeated, her voice low and simmering with a cold, controlled anger of her own. "And I always wondered what they had on you. A stolen child. My God, that's a new level of monstrous, even for a Preston." She leaned forward, her eyes glinting with a sudden, fierce light. "You're right to want to burn it all down, Mia. But you don't fight a fire with fire. You fight it by cutting off its oxygen. You said you don't care what it costs. Good, because it will cost everything. But not just for you." A slow, dangerous smile spread across her face, a smile that held no humor, only grim purpose. "Let's get to work." She became my strategist, my legal shield, my partner in vengeance. Our meetings took place in her cluttered study, a war room where decades of pain were being weaponized into a plan of beautiful, intricate destruction. Martha was relentless. She made me go over every detail again and again, not for emotional catharsis, but for tactical advantage. She was looking for leverage, for weaknesses in the family's armor. "The truth of Daniel's parentage is our emotional bombshell," she said one evening, pacing in front of her fireplace, a glass of whiskey in her hand. "It will destroy their reputation, their family, their son's entire reality. It's the dagger, but it's not the guillotine. Richard Vance is a narcissist. Public shame will wound him, but financial ruin will kill him. We need to take away his oxygen, and his oxygen is Preston money." And that's when I remembered. Something my father had said years and years ago, long before his mind had begun to fade. He had been complaining about Richard's cavalier attitude with money, his flashy investments. "The man has no moral compass," my father had grumbled. "Thank God for the trust. It has teeth, even if I don't." I told Martha about it. Her eyes lit up. "The Preston Family Trust. Of course, get me the documents, Mia. All of them." The next day, I retrieved the thick portfolio from the safe in Richard's study. I knew the combination. Richard had once smugly told it to me, confident I was too stupid to ever use it against him. I brought the papers to Martha, and we spread them across her massive desk, the dry, legalistic language a stark contrast to the human tragedy it governed. For hours, we pored over the dense text, Martha's finger tracing the lines of legalese, and then she found it. She let out a low whistle. "Well, I'll be damned. Your father was a piece of work, Mia, but he was no fool." She pointed to a section deep within the document. It was titled Article 9, Moral Turpitude and Family Honor. It was an archaic but legally ironclad clause, a relic from a more puritanical era. It stated that any primary beneficiary found, by a unanimous vote of the other primary beneficiaries, To have engaged in conduct that brought public shame, moral scandal, or disgrace upon the family name could be summarily and completely disinherited. Their share of the trust would be absorbed and divided among the remaining heirs. "This is it," Martha whispered, a note of awe in her voice. "This is the guillotine. The very thing they used to control you, the fear of scandal, the preservation of their precious reputation, is the instrument of their own destruction." It's poetic. "Who are the primary beneficiaries?" I asked, my heart beginning to pound again. Martha scanned the document. "At its inception, it was your father, your mother, and you. Your father passed his share to your mother, so the current primary voting beneficiaries are your mother, Clara Preston, your sister, Clara Vance, and you, Mia Preston." My heart sank. "My mother is in a nursing home. She has dementia. She barely recognizes me, and Clara would never vote against herself." "Clara won't have to," Martha said, her eyes glinting. "The clause can be triggered against any beneficiary. We trigger it against her. We accuse her of bringing public shame on the family by being complicit in the kidnapping and fraudulent raising of her own nephew, your son. Your vote is one. We need a second. We need your mother's vote." "That's impossible," I said, the hope draining out of me. "She can't consent." "She can't even form a coherent sentence most days." "She doesn't have to," Martha said softly. "Not anymore." Did she ever, in a moment of clarity, admit to what she did? Did she ever express guilt? Anything, Mia. Think. And then it hit me. A memory I had buried, too painful to examine. It was from about 5 years ago, shortly after my mother had been moved to the nursing home. I had gone to visit her on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The place smelled of antiseptic and despair. Most days, she was lost in a fog, talking to people who weren't there, reliving moments from her girlhood. But on that day, she was different. Her eyes were clear. She knew who I was. She had gripped my hand, her own as fragile as a bird's wing, and she had started to weep. Her words came in broken, guilt-ridden gasps. "I'm so sorry, Mia. I'm so sorry about the baby. Your baby. We shouldn't have done it. It was wrong, a terrible sin. Richard, he insisted. He said it was the only way to save the family, to save Clara. I was a coward. I let them take your baby. Forgive me, Mia. Forgive your foolish, weak mother." At the time, I had just sat there, frozen, unable to process this sudden confession after a lifetime of denial. But I had my phone in my lap, and without even thinking, my thumb had found the record button. I don't know why I did it. Perhaps some deep, instinctual part of me knew that this moment of lucidity was a precious, fleeting thing that needed to be captured. I had the recording. I had never listened to it. I couldn't bear to. I told Martha, my voice trembling. "I have it. I have a recording of her confessing everything." Martha's face was grim, but her eyes shone with triumph. "That's it, Mia. That's her vote. It's a confession, a clear statement of her role in the conspiracy. In a legal sense, it's her testimony from beyond the fog of her illness. With that recording and your vote, we have the unanimous decision required by the trust. We can disinherit Clara." The full weight of it settled on me. "And Richard?" "Richard is nothing without her," Martha explained, her voice cold and precise. "I've had a friend do some digging. The house is in Clara's name, funded by the trust. His car, his club memberships, his investments. It's all tied to Clara's inheritance. He has his lawyer's pension, but that's a pittance compared to the lifestyle he's accustomed to. Take away Clara's access to the Preston family trust, and he's not just ruined. He's nobody. A broke old man in a town that will suddenly see him for the fraud he is. We had our weapon. It was no longer just a dagger of truth. It was a financial warhead aimed at the very foundation of their lives. And I knew exactly when and where we would detonate it. The occasion was perfect, a stage of their own making. Richard and Clara's 50th wedding anniversary. A golden anniversary for a gilded lie. I insisted on hosting. Not in some neutral restaurant, but here, in the old family home. The scene of the crime, they were delighted, seeing it as a final, pathetic act of devotion from their loyal, spinster sister. They had no idea I was planning not a celebration, but an execution. I planned it meticulously, with Martha's guidance. I sent out the invitations, thick cream cardstock with gold lettering. Everyone who was anyone in Harmony Creek was invited. The cousins and old family friends who had always looked at me with pity. The mayor, who played golf with Richard every Saturday. Business partners who had profited from his corrupt dealings. And of course, Daniel, my Daniel, now a man with a wife and 2 small children of his own. My grandchildren. They would all be there, a captive audience for the final act. The night of the party, the house was ablaze with light, shimmering like a mirage. It was filled with flowers, music, and the sound of champagne corks popping. Clara was radiant in a gold-sequined dress, a queen in her court. Richard was triumphant, accepting congratulations with a magnanimous smile, his arm possessively around Clara's waist. They were the picture of enduring love, the pinnacle of Harmony Creek society. 50 years, half a century built on my stolen life. After the dinner, the toasts began. Friends stood up and spoke of Richard's integrity, of Clara's grace, of their inspirational love story. Daniel, my son, stood, his face glowing with love and pride. He raised his glass. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. 50 years of love and partnership. You are the foundation of my life, my role models for everything a marriage should be. I love you both. Happy anniversary." The room erupted in applause. Clara wiped a tear from her eye. Richard beamed. My heart felt like a block of ice in my chest. Then, I stood up. A hush fell over the room. Aunt Mia never made speeches. I smiled, a calm, serene expression I had practiced for weeks in the mirror. "I have one more tribute," I said, my voice clear and steady, carrying through the sudden silence. "A story about family, loyalty, and the secrets we keep to protect the ones we love. This is the story of this family, the real one." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply began to speak. I started with 2 sisters, one who shone like the sun and one who lived in her shadow. I told them about a charming young lawyer who came to town and a choice that was made. The gasps started as quiet ripples, but I kept my voice even, my gaze fixed on Richard and Clara. Their smiles had frozen, their faces turning to pale masks of confusion, then dawning horror. "Denial is a powerful thing," I said calmly, as Richard started to rise from his chair, his face mottling with rage. "People will say this is just the ramblings of a bitter, lonely woman. So I thought it best to bring a witness." I reached into my pocket and took out a small digital recorder. I pressed play, and my mother's voice, frail, ghostly, and filled with a lifetime of guilt, filled the opulent, silent room. "I'm so sorry, Mia, about the baby, your baby. We shouldn't have done it. I was a coward. I let them take your baby." The sound hung in the air like a death sentence. No one moved. No one breathed. Clara made a small, strangled sound, her hand flying to her throat. At that moment, as if on cue, a man dressed as a caterer, one of Martha's associates, walked calmly to Daniel's table. He placed a thick manila envelope in front of him. "A delivery for Mr. Vance," he said politely, and melted back into the shadows. Daniel, his face white as a sheet, stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. His hands trembled as he tore it open. Inside was a single, certified document from a DNA testing facility in the next state. I watched as his eyes scanned the page, saw the moment his brain processed the irrefutable scientific truth. The words, maternal match, MIA Preston. Probability, 99.999%. He looked from the paper to me, his eyes wide with a universe of confusion and shattering pain. Simultaneously, another of Martha's people delivered a second envelope to the mayor. The mayor, looking bewildered, opened it. Inside was not a test result, but a meticulously prepared dossier, complete with copies of bank statements, forged deeds, and sworn affidavits. It detailed years of Richard's financial crimes, embezzlement from the town council slush fund, fraudulent land deals that had enriched him and his cronies at the town's expense. The mayor's face went from confusion to disbelief to cold, hard fury as he read. I turned my attention back to the head table, to the ruins of the happy couple. Richard was on his feet now, sputtering, speechless with rage and panic. But my final words were not for him. They were for my sister. I looked directly at Clara, whose beautiful face had collapsed into a grotesque mask of horror and despair. I leaned slightly toward the microphone, my voice dropping, but carrying with chilling clarity. I repeated the words she had written on that anniversary card, the words that had started this all. "You said you wouldn't be here without me," I said. "You were right." Chaos did not erupt. It did not explode in a firestorm of shouts and accusations, the way it does in motion pictures. No, what happened in the grand ballroom of the Preston estate was something far more terrifying. It was an implosion, a silent, sickening collapse of reality, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room, leaving only a vacuum where a dynasty once stood. The music had long since died. The tinkling laughter of Harmony Creek's elite had frozen in their throats. 100 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, but I only saw one, Daniel. He stood beside the grand piano, the crisp white sheet of paper, the DNA report, his entire life's foundation turned to dust, trembling in his hand. His knuckles were white. He wasn't looking at the paper anymore. His gaze was locked on my face, and what I saw in his eyes was not anger, not yet. It was a bottomless, shattering confusion, the look of a man who has just learned the sky is not blue and the earth is not solid. He was trying to reconcile the woman he knew as his quiet, unassuming Aunt Mia with the architect of this breathtaking devastation. He was trying to find a lie in my expression, a crack in my composure, but he found none. I had spent 50 years building this moment. My resolve was granite. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. Someone near the back dropped a champagne flute. The sound, a sharp, crystalline shatter, was obscene in the stillness. It broke the spell. Clara moved. Her head, which had been bowed as if in prayer, snapped up. Her face was a mask of disbelief, her perfect makeup, a cruel joke against the ruin of her features. Her eyes, wide and wild, darted from me to Richard, searching for the script, for the cue that would tell her how to play this scene. But Richard, for the first time since I had known him, had no words. He stood rigid, his handsome face slack, the confident charm that was his armor now looking like a cheap, ill-fitting costume. He was a statue of a great man, suddenly revealed to be hollow. Clara's gaze landed back on me. Her lips parted, but no sound came out, just a dry, rasping breath. "Mia?" she whispered, the name a question, a plea. "What? What have you done?" I didn't answer. I just held her gaze. I let her see the decades of silence, the nights of terror, the lifetime of being a ghost in her perfect house. I let her see it all. And then, the scream. It wasn't a shout of anger. It was a sound torn from the deepest part of her soul, a raw animal noise of pure, undiluted agony. It clawed its way out of her throat and ripped through the suffocating silence of the ballroom, a sound of something being irrevocably broken. It went on and on, rising in pitch until it was unbearable. Guests flinched, covering their ears. A woman began to sob quietly. When the scream finally died, it left a ragged, gasping hole in the air. Clara's body was shuddering, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "Mia," she rasped, her voice shredded. She began to repeat my name over and over, not as a name, but as a curse, an incantation of despair. "Mia, Mia, Mia, you ruined it." Her eyes were wide with a frantic, uncomprehending horror. "It was perfect. It was all perfect. You ruined everything." Her accusation hung in the air, a pathetic, flimsy shield against the cataclysm. It was perfect. Her perfect life, built on my body. Her perfect family, born from my violation. Her perfect husband. Just then, two figures appeared in the grand archway of the ballroom. They didn't rush in. They entered with a calm, almost leisurely authority that was more chilling than any show of force. Mayor Thompson was one. The other was the chief of police, a man Richard played golf with every other Thursday. They weren't in a hurry. They didn't need to be. The scene had been set, the verdict delivered. They were merely the custodians of the fallout. The chief's eyes scanned the room, taking in the tableau of frozen guests, the sobbing woman, Clara's shaking form, Daniel's stunned immobility, and finally, Richard. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, as if confirming something he already knew. Two uniformed officers stepped in behind him, their presence a stark, brutal punctuation mark at the end of the Preston family's long, celebrated story. Richard saw them. And in that moment, something inside him finally, completely, collapsed. The mask of the powerful attorney, the charming socialite, the untouchable patriarch. It didn't just crack. It disintegrated, turning to dust and revealing the small, frightened thing that had been hiding behind it all along. He looked old, defeated. He made no move to run, no attempt to protest. He simply stood there as the officers approached him, their steps methodical and quiet on the polished marble floor. One of the officers spoke his name, quietly but firmly. "Richard Vance, you need to come with us." Richard didn't answer. He didn't even look at the officer. His eyes found mine across the room. And for a fleeting second, I saw it. Not hatred, not fury. Just a flicker of what looked like recognition. As if he was finally seeing me, the real me. The woman who had been his silent, captive audience for half a century, and he was realizing far too late that the ghost had teeth. Clara saw the officers moving toward her husband, and she let out another wrenching sob, a sound of finality. "No," she whimpered, stumbling forward. "No, you can't. We're—" She couldn't finish the sentence. There was no we anymore. There was no Preston dynasty. There was only the wreckage. The officers were professional, discreet. They didn't put him in cuffs in front of everyone. They simply flanked him, a hand gently on his arm, and guided him toward the door. The Titan of Harmony Creek was being led away like a lamb. The crowd parted for them in a wave of silent, morbid fascination. They were no longer guests at a party. They were vultures, perched and watching, ready to feast on the carcass of a reputation. The whispers started then, a low, sibilant hiss that would become a roar by morning, consuming everything the Preston name had ever stood for. As Richard passed Daniel, he paused. He looked at the boy, the man he had raised as his son. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came. What could he say? What comfort could the monster offer to the child he had created from his crime? He simply looked away, his shoulders slumping, and allowed himself to be led out into the night. The flashing lights of the patrol cars outside painted the ballroom in strobing flashes of red and blue, a macabre disco illuminating the faces of the stunned and the horrified. Daniel was still frozen, the paper clutched in his fist. He slowly lowered his arm, his eyes never leaving my face. The confusion was hardening now, calcifying into something else, something colder, pain, betrayal. Clara, abandoned in the center of the room, finally crumpled. Her legs gave way, and she sank to the floor, her elegant gown pooling around her like a shroud. Her sobs were the only sound in the room now, the desolate, heartbroken cries of a queen whose kingdom had just turned to ash. The Preston Trust would be frozen by morning. Richard was already in custody, the financial crimes dossier I'd given the mayor ensuring he wouldn't see the light of day for a very long time. And Clara was having a complete and total nervous breakdown, right there on the marble floor she had so painstakingly chosen. She would be in a private hospital by sunrise, the gilded cage exchanged for a padded one. My revenge was complete. The weavers of my torment were unraveled. And as I stood there, amidst the ruins of their lives, I felt nothing. A vast, hollow, echoing emptiness. There was no thrill of victory, no righteous satisfaction, just the bitter, metallic taste of ash in my mouth. The days that followed are a blur of quiet, methodical dismantling. The party was the explosion. This was the cleanup. I met with Martha Blackwood in her office, the scent of old books and strong tea a comforting anchor in the storm. She was, as always, pragmatic, her face grim but satisfied. "The morality clause has been invoked," she said, sliding a stack of documents across her mahogany desk. "The board was eager to comply once the news of Richard's arrest and the circumstances became public. The trust is frozen. His assets, Clara's assets, all sequestered pending the outcome of the criminal and civil proceedings. She looked at me over the rim of her glasses. You did it, Mia. You actually did it. You brought down the whole house of cards. I just nodded, staring at the legal jargon on the papers. Words like liquidation, dissolution, severance. They were the language of endings. My share, I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. I want to liquidate my share of the estate. Everything. Martha raised an eyebrow. Everything? Mia, that's a substantial... It's your birthright. It's blood money, I said, the words flat and cold. It's the price of my silence. I don't want it in its current form. I want it severed, cleansed. Turn it into cash. I'm leaving. She didn't argue. She saw the look in my eyes, the look of someone who had already left, whose body was just waiting to catch up. She simply nodded. I'll handle it. I never went back to the house. The Grand Preston Manor on the hill, my prison. I had an assistant of Martha's pack a single suitcase for me, with the few things that were ever truly mine. Some clothes, a handful of books, the small faded photograph of a baby boy I had kept hidden in the lining of a jewelry box for 30 years. My last view of Harmony Creek was through the windshield of a nondescript rental car. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I drove east, toward the coast, with no destination in mind, other than away. I drove for 2 days, the landscape changing from the manicured green hills of my hometown to the flat, open expanse of the heartland, and finally to the salty, humid air of the Atlantic. The entire time, I was haunted by Daniel's face. The look in his eyes as Richard was led away, the cold wall of pain that had descended between us. He hadn't spoken a single word to me since that night. He couldn't even look at me. In his eyes, I wasn't his mother who had saved him from a lie. I was a stranger, a phantom who had emerged from the shadows to detonate his world, to tell him his father was a monster and his mother was a collaborator. I had given him the truth, but the truth was a poison, and I had forced him to drink it. I understood. I didn't push. I didn't call. I didn't write. What could I say? I'm sorry I had to destroy your life to reclaim my own. Justice is not a clean, simple thing. It's a blunt instrument, and it leaves wreckage in its wake. Daniel was the primary casualty of my war, and that was a debt I knew, even then, that justice could never repay. I finally stopped in a small, forgotten town on the coast, a place where the main industry seemed to be the relentless rhythm of the tide. I used a portion of the liquidated funds to buy a small house, a cottage really, perched on a low cliff overlooking the ocean. It was weathered and worn, the paint peeling from the salt spray, the windows rattling when the wind blew. It was perfect. It was real. The noise of the waves became the soundtrack to my new life. It was the only thing I heard at night, a constant, soothing shush that washed away the echoes of Clara's screams and the deafening silence of my former home. I was free. I could wake when I wanted, eat what I wanted, say what I wanted, or say nothing at all. For the first time in over 50 years, no one was watching me, judging me, controlling me. I was the sole sovereign of my own small, quiet world. But freedom, I learned, is a lonely country. The victory I had fought for felt profoundly hollow. I had won my life back, but the price was my son. I had liberated myself from the gilded cage only to find myself in a different kind of isolation, one of my own making, an island of quiet grief. I would walk the beach for hours, the cold water lapping at my ankles, and I would think about Daniel. Where was he? What was he doing? Did he hate me? Of course he hated me. How could he not? I had taken the man he called father away from him. I had broken the woman he called mother. I had revealed his entire existence to be a carefully constructed lie. I had my justice, but he was paying the price. That was 5 years ago. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for a scandal to fade into town legend. Long enough for a man to grow old in a prison cell. Long enough for a broken woman to be quietly moved to a long-term care facility, her mind lost forever in the ruins of her perfect life. Long enough for a young man to rebuild his world from the ashes. And long enough for a ghost to learn how to be a person again. My life here by the sea settled into a gentle, predictable rhythm. I wake with the sun. I make a pot of tea. I read. I tend to the small, wild garden I've cultivated in the salty soil. I walk on the beach, collecting sea glass smoothed by the churning water, tiny jewels forged in turbulence. It's a peaceful existence. Not a happy one, not in the way people think of happiness, full of laughter and company. But it's mine. It's a quiet peace, a contentment earned at an impossible cost. I have accepted my solitude. I have made my peace with the echoes. Then, last week, a letter arrived. It came with the usual mail, a utility bill, a catalog for garden gnomes, nothing to distinguish it from the mundane flow of paper that marks the days. The envelope was plain, cream-colored. The address was written in an unfamiliar hand, firm and clear, but the name in the return address corner made my heart stop. D. Vance. He had kept the name. The name of the man who had violated me, the man who had raised him. The choice was a statement in itself, a complex knot of identity and loyalty I couldn't begin to untangle. My hands, which have developed the slight, telltale tremble of age, shook so badly I could barely open the envelope. I slit the seal with the edge of a seashell from my windowsill, my breath held tight in my chest. What would it say? 5 years of silence, broken by a single sheet of paper. Would it be filled with rage? A final, definitive damnation of the woman who destroyed his family? Would it be a demand for money? Or worse, would it be an offer of forgiveness I didn't feel I deserved? I slid the single folded sheet out of the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. My fingers registered the quality of it before my eyes registered the words. It wasn't a long letter. It wasn't a letter at all, not really. There were only 3 words. 3 words, written in the center of the page in that same firm, steady hand. A simple, devastating question. Who are you? He's not ready. He's not ready to call me mother. He might never be. The name on the envelope, the cold, formal question. It's a boundary, a line drawn in the sand. He's not asking for a mother. He's asking for a story. Not the one the family told, not the one the town whispered about. Not the one the lawyers argued over. Mine. Who are you? The question has been sitting on my kitchen table for a week, next to my perpetually full cup of tea. It has haunted my walks on the beach. It has whispered to me on the wind at night. It is the first thing I think of in the morning, and the last thing I see before I close my eyes. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that this is the real reckoning. Vengeance was a demolition. It was loud and brutal and necessary. It cleared the rubble of the past, but it didn't heal me. It left me free, but empty. It gave me justice, but no peace. So I sit here now, with a fresh pot of tea and my trembling hands, a stack of blank paper before me. I am preparing to answer his question, to tell him everything, to tell him about the quiet girl who lived in her sister's shadow, the ghost who haunted the halls of a perfect house, and the woman who finally, after half a century, clawed her way out of the grave they had dug for her. I will tell him about the scent of lavender on a summer evening, and the cold, dead look in a predator's eyes. I will tell him about the weight of a secret, and the soul-crushing burden of being a ghost at your own child's birthday parties. I will tell him about the 10 minutes I was allowed to hold him after he was born, the most sacred and agonizing 10 minutes of my life. Vengeance didn't heal me. It was just a key, turning a lock in a door that had been rusted shut for 50 years. But telling the truth, telling my truth, to him. Perhaps that is what lies on the other side of the door. Perhaps that is the thing that will finally, truly, set me free. My story isn't just about revenge. It's about the secrets we keep and the price we pay for silence. What do you think? Can telling the truth ever truly heal a wound that deep, or does it just create new ones? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.